Coffee grounds are labeled toxic waste for gardens, accused of strangling seedlings and breeding mold so deadly that extension offices warn against using even a handful. But what if the kitchen scrap everyone throws away is actually the most powerful nitrogen bomb you can brew at home? If you add one ingredient and wait 3 days, it becomes a living fertilizer that garden centers cannot stock because it refuses to stay stable. And it works faster than anything in a bottle. Why would a free amendment that supercharges growth be hidden from every gardening guide? And what makes fresh coffee grounds so dangerous in the first place? Fresh coffee grounds are not just harmless brown crumbs. They are a nitrogen trap waiting to spring. When you dump them straight onto soil, the reaction is invisible but immediate. The main culprit is phenolic acid, a compound that leaches out the moment moisture arrives. Phenolic acids act like chemical locks, binding to nitrogen in the soil and making it unavailable to plants. A soil test taken 1 week after a heavy application of raw grounds can show nitrogen levels plummeting by 30% or more, even though the grounds themselves contain nitrogen. This is the paradox that confuses gardeners. Coffee grounds test at 2% nitrogen by weight, higher than most compost. But in their raw state, they hoard that nitrogen, refusing to release it. Instead, they trigger what soil scientists call nitrogen immobilization. Microbes rush in to break down the grounds, but they need nitrogen to do their work, so they pull it from the surrounding soil, starving the very plants you are trying to feed. The pH shift adds another layer of trouble. Fresh grounds register between 4.5 and 5.0 on a digital meter, acidic enough to shock roots adapted to neutral conditions. But the real danger is not the acidity, it is the caffeine. Residual caffeine in spent grounds acts as an allelopathic agent, a natural herbicide that suppresses germination and stunts root development. In laboratory trials, seedlings watered with coffee ground extract showed 40% slower growth than controls. The roots turned brown and brittle, unable to push through soil that should have nourished them. University extension bulletins caution that even a thin layer of raw grounds, especially when damp, can create a barrier. The fine particles mat together, forming a crust that sheds water rather than absorbing it. Oxygen cannot penetrate, roots cannot breathe. Within days, what looked like a generous amendment becomes a suffocating blanket. This is why raw coffee grounds earn their reputation as a gardening hazard, not a gift. Wilted leaves and yellowed stems tell the story long before a soil test confirms the nitrogen lockup. When raw coffee grounds hit the garden bed in anything but the smallest dose, plants react fast and not in a way anyone wants. New growth slows to a crawl, leaves pale from green to yellow, and roots struggle to extend beyond the coffee layer. Extension guidelines set a firm limit: never apply more than a 1/4 inch layer of raw grounds per season. Even then, the advice comes with a warning: mix them thoroughly into compost first. Never pile them around seedlings. A horticulturist at Oregon State University puts it bluntly: coffee grounds are excellent for nitrogen, but if you use them fresh, you will starve your plants and invite fungal mats. Always compost first. Photographs from university field trials show rows of lettuce and beans with stunted growth and patchy emergence after a single heavy dose of raw grounds. The damage is not subtle: bare spots, weak stems, and a lingering layer of white mold. These symptoms are not rare accidents. They are the predictable outcome when too much raw coffee collides with delicate roots. The phenolic acids strip away nitrogen, the caffeine blocks germination, and the fine particles seal the soil. This is why extension offices repeat the same message: treat raw coffee grounds with the same caution as fresh sawdust. Ignore the guidelines and the garden pays the price. A mason jar, coffee grounds, water, and a spoonful of molasses does not look like a scientific breakthrough, but within 48 hours, a transformation begins. The surface comes alive with foam, carbon dioxide, the unmistakable sign that microbes are at work. Yeasts and lactic acid bacteria, drawn from the air and the grounds themselves, start feasting on the sugars. This is not a random process. First, the yeasts multiply, breaking down molasses into simple alcohols and releasing gas. Then, lactic acid bacteria take over, converting those alcohols into organic acids. Each stage lowers the pH, softening the acidity and neutralizing the phenolic compounds that once made grounds so dangerous. The foam is more than a visual cue, it is a chemical signal. As microbes digest the sugars, they excrete enzymes that break down caffeine and phenolic acids, transforming them from growth inhibitors into harmless byproducts. the entire mixture shifts from a sharp, bitter smell to a mellow, earthy aroma. A permaculture practitioner who has brewed hundreds of these ferments puts it simply: if it is foaming, it is working. That is the sign the biology is alive and the nitrogen is unlocking. The carbon dioxide fizz is proof that the microbial engine is running at full speed, breaking down the grounds and releasing nutrients in a form plants can absorb instantly. No lab is needed. The living process reveals itself in every bubble and every change in scent. What began as a nitrogen trap is now a liquid fertilizer, ready to feed plants in a form they can drink. This is the secret behind the speed. The nitrogen is no longer locked away. It is pre-digested, carried straight into the roots by the work of invisible allies. Lab results cut through the guesswork. When raw coffee grounds are mixed with water, the nitrogen remains bound in complex organic molecules. Kjeldahl nitrogen tests, the gold standard for measuring plant-available nitrogen, show that raw ground extracts deliver less than 10% of their total nitrogen in soluble form. But after fermentation with molasses, the numbers tell a different story. The same solution, left to bubble for 3 days, releases over 60% of its nitrogen as ammonium and nitrate. The form's roots absorb instantly. The transformation is not just about nitrogen. Gas chromatography analysis reveals a spike in organic acids after fermentation. Lactic, acetic, and citric acids appear in measurable concentrations, and these acids act like molecular keys. They chelate micronutrients, wrapping around iron, magnesium, and calcium ions and keeping them dissolved in solution. High-performance liquid chromatography backs this up. Fermented samples show a 70% reduction in caffeine and phenolic acids compared to raw extracts. The allelopathic compounds that once stunted growth are broken down into harmless fragments. In one controlled trial, soluble nitrogen in fermented coffee tea reached nearly triple the level found in raw leach, while the pH shifted from 4.8 to 6.2, a near-neutral range safe for most crops. These numbers are not theoretical. They are the direct output of microbial digestion. The data confirm what the foam and the earthy smell suggest. Fermentation unlocks nitrogen, buffers pH, and neutralizes toxins. This is not garden folklore. Kjeldahl tests, gas chromatography, and pH meters draw a clear line between hazard and tonic. Rows of seedlings tell a story numbers alone cannot. In controlled trials, side-by-side trays of spinach and peppers receive their first watering. One group gets diluted fermented coffee tea, another gets the same amount of raw coffee extract, a third gets commercial liquid fertilizer, a fourth is left untouched. Within 3 days, the differences become impossible to ignore. Shoots in the fermented group break the surface first, followed closely by plants-fed commercial fertilizer. The raw coffee group falls behind, and some seedlings fail to emerge at all. Others show pale, thread-like growth. By the end of the first week, the fermented group surges ahead. Spinach leaves double in size compared to the control, their color a deep, glossy green. Pepper stems thicken and branch earlier, with leaflets unfurling wider and more robust. Measured shoot length in the fermented group averages 35% higher than the untreated control and 18% above the commercial fertilizer group. The raw coffee trays show patchy growth, with yellowed edges and shriveled tips, a visual reminder of the danger already explained. Leaf area meter readings confirm what the eye sees. Plants-fed fermented coffee tea average 20 to 30% greater leaf surface than commercial fertilizer, translating to more photosynthetic power and faster energy capture. Root inspection at day 10 reveals dense white fibrous networks in the fermented group, while raw coffee roots are sparse, brown, and shallow. In fruiting trials, peppers set buds sooner, and early yield counts show fruit forming 4 days ahead of both commercial fertilizer and the control. The speed of the response is the most striking result. Where synthetic fertilizer delivers steady, predictable gains, fermented coffee tea triggers what gardeners call the explosion, a visible leap in growth within the first 72 hours. Every metric, shoot height, leaf color, root mass, points to the same conclusion. When nitrogen is pre-digested and toxins are neutralized, plants can absorb nutrients instantly, fueling a burst of vitality that no raw grounds or bottled salt can match. In the early 1900s, coffee grounds were not trash. They were a sought-after resource. Urban gardeners and small farmers collected spent grounds from cafes and roasting houses, piling them in bins to age for months before spreading them on fields. The practice was so common that municipal composting programs in cities like New York and London designated coffee waste as premium organic matter, valued for its nitrogen content and fine texture. By the 1920s, agronomists at agricultural colleges began documenting the benefits. Composted coffee improved soil structure, boosted earthworm populations, and delivered slow-release nitrogen to crops. But the method required patience. Grounds had to sit for at least 6 months, often mixed with straw or manure, before they were safe to use. The process was local, small-scale, and cyclical. Then came the chemical revolution. By the 1950s, Haber-Bosch nitrogen flooded the market. Synthetic fertilizers offered instant results, shipped in bags, stored indefinitely, and applied with no waiting period. Companies like Scott's and Miracle Grow built empires on the promise of convenience. The old composting systems, with their long timelines and variable outcomes, could not compete. Coffee grounds, once valued, became waste. Cafes stopped saving them. Gardeners stopped asking. The knowledge of how to ferment them quickly, how to unlock their nitrogen in days rather than months, faded from popular memory. By the 1970s, extension offices were warning against raw grounds, and the nuance was lost. The story of coffee as fertilizer became a footnote, its living potential forgotten in the rush for scale and certainty. A living fertilizer that works in 72 hours sounds like a miracle, but there is a hard reason you will not find fermented coffee tea on any garden center shelf. The problem is not legal or secret, it is biology and logistics. Once you mix grounds, water, and sugar, the jar becomes a miniature bioreactor. Microbes feast and multiply, releasing carbon dioxide with every breath. That foaming action, so vital for breaking down nitrogen and caffeine, is the very thing that makes the brew impossible to commercialize. If you try to bottle it tight, pressure builds enough to pop caps, crack bottles, or even explode plastic containers. Leave it open, and the living culture keeps churning, but only for a short window. After 2 weeks, the brew loses its punch. The microbes run out of food, the acids fade, and what was once a potent tonic goes flat. Warehouses and garden centers run on predictability. Products must sit for months, sometimes years, without risk or change. Fermented coffee tea refuses to play by those rules. It is alive, unstable, and always on the clock. That is why the only way to use it is to brew it yourself, fresh and local, every single time. The trick is not forbidden by law, it is forbidden by the limits of the supply chain. 1 cup of used coffee grounds goes into a wide-mouthed glass jar or plastic bucket. Make sure the grounds are spent, not fresh, and free of paper filters or sweeteners. Add 1 quart of non-chlorinated water. If your tap water is treated, let it stand overnight so the chlorine can evaporate. Chlorine will kill the very microbes you are trying to cultivate. Next, stir in 1 tablespoon of blackstrap molasses or pure cane syrup. The sugar is not for the plants, it is for the microbes. Use a wooden spoon or a gloved hand to mix until the molasses dissolves completely. The liquid will look dark brown, almost black, with fine particles swirling in suspension. Cover the jar with a cloth, a paper towel, or a loose-fitting lid, just enough to keep out insects and dust, but not so tight that gas cannot escape. This is essential. Over the next 24 to 48 hours, the surface will start to foam, small bubbles will rise and pop, and a faint yeasty aroma will replace the sharp coffee smell. This is the sign that fermentation is alive and working. The timeline can stretch to 72 hours if temperatures are cool or if the molasses is slow to activate. Every 12 hours, give the mix a gentle stir and a quick sniff. The moment the scent shifts from acrid to earthy and the color deepens to a rich chocolate brown, the batch is ready. If the liquid smells rotten, like sulfur or decay, discard it and start again. Something went wrong with the balance, likely contamination or too much sugar. When the ferment is right, the result is a living nitrogen tea, fresh and potent, but also fleeting. Use it within 1 week for maximum effect. Never seal the jar airtight, and never skip the daily check. Fermentation is a living process, and your senses are the best guide. A living tonic this powerful demands respect. Fermented coffee tea is never used straight from the jar. The golden rule is dilution. Always, for every 1 cup of finished brew, add at least 1 gallon of water. This brings the nitrogen load down to a level roots can handle, turning what could be a shock into a gentle feed. Skip this step, And even the best ferment risks overwhelming seedlings or burning sensitive crops. Timing is everything. The moment when plants crave nitrogen most is during vegetative growth, just after transplanting, or as leaves begin to expand. That is the window when a single drench can trigger the surge. Bigger leaves, stronger stems, deeper green. Pour the diluted tea only onto moist soil. Never dry. Dry ground pulls in nutrients too quickly, risking salt stress even at safe concentrations. Always water first if the soil is parched, then follow with the tonic. Never use on nitrogen-sensitive crops like beans or peas, which fix their own nitrogen and can suffer from excess. And never apply to seedlings with just 1 or 2 true leaves. Wait until they are established, with strong roots ready to drink. If the batch smells sour or rotten, discard it. A healthy ferment smells earthy or yeasty, not foul. This is not a product to store for months. Use within 1 week of finishing. Any leftover should be poured out, not saved for later. Gloves are wise for handling, especially if you have sensitive skin. Fermented or not, coffee can still stain and irritate cuts. Stick to the 1 to 4 dilution. Respect the timing, and the garden will show its gratitude in days. Right now, millions of pounds of coffee grounds are thrown away while the tools to transform them sit in every kitchen. As commercial fertilizers dominate shelves, living nutrient solutions like fermented coffee remain locked out, not by law, but by logistics. The future of soil health may depend not on what is sold, but on what we dare to brew ourselves. What would your garden become if you stopped waiting for permission?